Hi, this is Paul. One of you sent me this clip it was from Chris Williamson's conversation with Alex O'Connor, and he has now posted it on his channel. And there's a lot in this clip that's worth talking about. Probably best to just jump into it. I'm going to let some of it play again. If you want to watch the whole thing without me interrupting, it's right there on the channel. Watch it without me. I give you my permission. But let's go.
What the success of a movement like New Atheism consists in the fact that all they had to do was just tell other people why they're wrong. You only need to poke holes in other people's clothes. But if you need to like sew your own shirt, that gets a little more difficult. C.S. Lewis said that the purpose of philosophy is not the cutting down of forests, but the irrigation of deserts.
Great quote.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I've thought about this for a good while. The seductiveness of being a critic as opposed to being somebody that makes suggestions, and the lack of preparedness of anybody to put forward any proposals for anything. You know, it's easy for both sides accuse each other of being reactionary, right? The reactionary right, the reactionary left. Yeah. And ultimately, for instance, perfect example of this is in the world of dating and sort of mate selection in the mating market. Everybody can provide criticisms about what's going wrong, and almost nobody provides any actionable steps to improve it.
That's a really great point, and whether or not you apply it to the dating market, once you get, let's say, into relationality, that's an excellent example, because almost anyone will have critiques about how they're being treated, and if you just sort of reverse it the other way around, you'll discover that, yeah, they've got complaints about how you're treating them too. And what that means is it's actually obviously far more difficult to do it well than to point out when something is not done well, especially when something is not being done well towards you. It's a great point.
Beyond.
And I just wonder, if you go on his show, do you have to like this drink? I mean, is it part of the condition? You can come on the show, but you got to drink the sponsored drink.
Something that is eliminative rather than additive, right? Like, well, if we could just stop doing this, then this would be fixed. It's like, I don't think that that's quite the way that it works. And
that's because in real life, there's always doing. And even not doing something leaves a vacuum, and you have sins of commission and sins of omission. And what that means is that you're either doing or not doing, and it's hard to do things well.
There's another very unique protection mechanism that's given, which is it's very hard to criticize someone's criticism, or at least being a critic leaves you open to criticism way less than being a proposer.
Oh, yeah.
Right? If I put something forward, if I posit a potential solution, for you to be able to come back and say, well, this is shit, and this is shit, and this is shit, makes complete. It's very easy to do. Whereas for you to say, for me to critique what you did, and then for you to come back and go, well, actually this and this and this about, it's like, it kind of gets all a little bit abstract, and it's a few degrees removed from anything that feels real.
Yeah.
Now, if you go back to my conversation with Vocal Distance, maybe it's a little short clip. I've played it a few times, and maybe I'll drop it in right here. It's the background. And this is part of what's happening now, in that, after Tom Holland's book, Dominion, there's this recognition that you don't really notice your own culture until you see the edges of it or get beyond it. And then you begin to look back at it and say, well, it was easy to critique. It was easy to criticize. There were always complaints, and I could always say, well, it could be done better. But when I actually had to do better, I discovered that, again, as I've said many times, you start from a map, a first draft map that you inherited from the world that you grew up in, from often your parents and from people around you. And you did not consciously absorb that map, but you absorbed that map, and that was the first way to begin. High CPU usage detected, my computer tells me. I'm going to see what's up with that. My computer's just fine. On with the show. So when Wokel talks about background, that background is sort of the sedimentary the sedimentary results of generation after generation after generation after generation of doing things. In other words, we all inherit this world, and we inherit these maps, and these maps go and go and go, and then someone says, well, I think this little part of the map should be better. Well, I think everything should be better. Well, why don't we try that? No, but this little part, if this little part was better, then this other stuff would be better too. Yeah, if my father was a wealthy man, then I would, well, would I actually have been better if my father was a wealthy man? I don't know. Because of course, the funny thing, the difficult thing about history is you can't just sort of run it in reverse. And if my father had been, and of course movies play with this and stories play with this. How about if my mother had not been an alcoholic? Now, my mother was not an alcoholic, but if my mother had been an alcoholic, my life, I think it's fairly easy to say, would have been worse. But there's a lot going on here. And this is when we begin to get to the point of realizing, again, we'll use combinatorial explosiveness, that how many other things would change if my mother had been an alcoholic? It's impossible to know. I was thinking about this the other day. Life is a very complex thing. And I was thinking about, let's say, if you had chosen to marry this person rather than this person, a decision that I had made 37 years ago. In fact, we push it back to 39 years ago when I started going out with the woman that became my wife. If it had been with someone else, and the other woman had different parents than the woman I married, and the other woman had different personality, and you very quickly see that this world is just this sort of never-ending. It's like one thing impacts another. Now, there are limits to it, but huge decisions and choices. And, again, movies love to play around with this. I think there was a Gwyneth Paltrow movie a number of years ago. I think I saw it once. I don't think it was a tremendously remarkable movie, but it had a nice image of sliding doors where you sort of abruptly stop. One tiny little incident, then it's the butterfly effect, basically, just rumbles out and completely changes your life.
Simon Cowell can't write a song. If the world was full of Simon Cowells, then we'd end up with no music. Somebody's got to do the building here. You can't just be a critic. And this is what I think has been the reason for the success of the sort of anti-new atheist stuff that we've been seeing recently. I mean, you'll have seen this. Even the new atheists themselves sort of treat it like it's a dead animal, and in many ways it is. And I think it's got to do with the fact that, yeah, they've done a very good job of cutting down the central pillar of what has traditionally been the reason for people getting out of bed in the morning.
Now, so we had our estuary meeting Sunday morning at 9:00 here at Living Stones, and one of the guys brought to the conversation, his topic basically was, how do we know where the line is between Christian and non-Christian? Is it, and you see the struggling with it in this little corner all over the place. Someone identifies as a Christian. For example, again, Richard Dawkins just came out and said, I'm a civilizational, or I'm a cultural Christian. I wish England was culturally Christian and didn't celebrate Ramadan. And of course, in America, you have this upheaval. I did the video last week about the Holy Post with, the Sky Jatani illustration that I want Christmas, I want Santa Claus, but I don't want to have to lie to my children about Santa Claus. Now, we're going to get to the lying to the children part here, because, and this is amazing, this is Alex O'Connor, who was sort of a B-level celebrity atheist. He was a very young man, and then, of course, he got an education at Oxford, and now he's sort of in this, well, he's still an atheist, but he's an honest atheist. You can see him working through the issues. Now, I noticed that Elizabeth Oldfield posted on Twitter today, I'm not as convinced as Justin Brierley that revival is breaking out, but something is on the change. At least a few demographic clusters, and it's summarized by this comment on Jordan Peterson's YouTube series on the Bible. Me 5 years ago, religion for sheep. It's just the opiate of the masses. Me now, Finally, a 2.5-hour lecture on God. And then she said, come along and discuss what exactly might be happening with me, Justin, and Cosmic Skeptic next month. And so Tuesday, May 14th, in the UK. And again, if my father were a wealthy man and I had unlimited resources and didn't have to work, I'd fly out to that event. I would get on it. Well, would I be living in Sacramento if my father had been a wealthy man? Or would I have been living in some high rise in New York City or some beautiful place overlooking Los Angeles? I don't know where I would be, but I would fly out and hear this. Or maybe I wouldn't be interested at all in this because all of my thinking would be the same and I wouldn't be here making videos on YouTube. So there's that. But I think Elizabeth Oldfield is right in that while I very much agree that something is changing and there is sort of a rebirth of belief in God, it's not going to be sort of going back. So Sam and Brendan Graham Dempsey had a really good conversation on Sam's channel today, and I left a bunch of comments in there, and I still think that whatever we're meaning by this word metamodernity, and maybe I'm just going to have to drop it because, he knows a lot more about it than I do, and so I should maybe just stop using the word. But he really nicely in this video lays out what he thinks it is. But he also, in a place in this video, sort of really nicely laid out what he thinks about in terms of modernity and postmodernity. Maybe I'll play that.
And so what he's seeing is, so Searle talks about the background, the network, and the network of intentionality is all the ideas, all of your intentional conscious content, right? Everything that's about something, dreams, visions, ideas, thoughts, goals, all the artifacts of consciousness, the things that furnish your conscious world and your ideas. That's right. Intentionality just means ofness or aboutness. So anytime you have a thought of something or about something, that's intentionality.
Yep.
And he's saying you have a network of intentionality, all of these intentional bits of intentionality of knowing things and feeling things and having thoughts about things and imagination, and all of that forms a network of intentionality. And that gets meaning up against a background. And the background is a set of capacities, things like knowing a language, having a prefrontal cortex, being able to see, having senses, the capacity to use language, the ability to think. And the background, and he says this in his book on perception, he says there's no hard and fast line between the background and the network. Just like there's no hard and fast line between a tree and its roots. They kind of bleed into each other.
Right.
And what's happened is that the larger background, when you have a shared background, your network of intentionality, you can use the network of intentionality to get clarity and to have meaning and to communicate.
Yep.
But when the background isn't shared, because meaning occurs in a network against a background, when the background isn't shared, then it's hard to create shared meaning.
Yes.
Communication becomes difficult.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's a great way to frame it.
And postmodernism is in essence the destruction of the background.
Yes. Yes. Yep. Yep.
And
that makes sense.
What Searle says when he talks about reading, now here's the value of artists. He says that he read the Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah.
And he said, I didn't learn a single new proposition. I knew that everything had happened. And yet I had greater clarity about what went on in the Soviet Union. And he said, well, why did that happen? He said, it didn't increase my network. It flushed out the background. But there was an aesthetic appeal to adopting a background of the secular humanist thought, which is if we can simplify it down, we can get everything we want. We can get these simple things and then we can build on it, and things get a little bit more complex. And they wanted to make things simple. They wanted a simple world and a simple universe. And they didn't realize that all of the tools of science that they were using come out of that the meaning of those things occurs against a very particular kind of a background. the reason that science has emerged in Western civilization before it emerged other places is not because of the network of propositions that they had. It's because of the background.
And again, where I was going with this is the crisis in the church right now is, why would I go there? And I think the answer is because you have to get the background. And if you don't get the background, and because I think you're right, and then part of what happened in a lot of churches was, well, we're going to give you the bucket of propositions, and we're going to run you through the bucket of propositions. And when you recognize that you can regurgitate to us the bucket of propositions, then you will have what you need to go out into the world. But it's exactly the same vision that you just stated with the positivists. It's exactly the same vision.
Mm-hmm. It's very similar.
And not only that, I'll try to come at this through the lens of this corner of the internet or this little corner and what it is that I'm specifically trying to bring to the conversation that I feel like is in danger of being missed, which is that I think folks in this little corner get the postmodern insight, which is to say we can't have this monarchical vision, that we're rooted in perspectives and that it's personal and perspectival and participatory, all that stuff that they get from Vervaeke, like great, totally true. And then they recognize all this and see that this is a legitimate critique of modernism, and that that modernist frame was trying to do this view from nowhere and this monarchical vision. Great. So now we've got an insight of perspectivalism and a critique of modernity that shows that the modernity itself is just another perspective, that the scientific approach is a perspective, right?
Frequentism is a type of Bayesian statistics.
Yeah,
Bayesian statistics incorporates frequentism within it. Yeah.
Now that's kind of the direction I'm heading in. But the danger is that you misinterpret this insight to allow you to do this thing where you say, all right, well, if we're all just dealing with perspectives and the modern one, just as good as any other, and the postmodern one clearly has lots of flaws, why not just work with a traditional religious, kind of doctrinal literalism, what have you, of the sort that existed pre-modern scientific interrogation?
Why not just go back and say, all right, everyone has a perspective. I'm just doing this perspective. Thanks for your insight that there are other perspectives. I'm just going to keep perspectiving.
Well, yeah, and I think that there's a danger then in how you apply this, right? And so I think there are many ways that people can just say, all right, well then I'm just going to hold to my perspective because I am a Christian and because I'm not. And again, there's an insight here, and it's an important one. Like, yes, that is something to take very seriously. Like, don't just hop into a different perspective for no reason, because that perspective is important to you and valuable to you and shapes your view of the world and all that. Like, great, cool. But here's the danger, right? Is that this can become a bypass of modern thought, because you get the postmodern and you grew up in a traditional, or let's say you found a traditional, doxological lens that really works very well and is very meaningful for you and of use. And now you're just going to use the postmodern insight about perspectives to just avoid the modern stuff and just live in the traditional. And that is what I see people being in danger of. I'm not going to say people are doing that or make that kind of claim or whatever. But
well, obviously you have an opinion about it because you're labeling it as danger, and he'll talk about it a little bit later. And he and I have gone back and forth about this quite a bit. We'll let Sam deliver the payload.
But the way that the conversation is unfolding tends in that direction. And
and not to make anyone too angry, but do you feel like the people who are attracted to Orthodoxy or Eastern Orthodoxy, or at least some of them, some of the time, are maybe sort of doing an act or a move kind of like that?
I do, and I think it doesn't. I mean, by Orthodoxy, I'm not sure if you mean specifically like Eastern Orthodoxy.
I mean Eastern Orthodoxy, converting to the Church of Eastern Orthodoxy.
Sure, and so yes, there's that, and I think that. But I would say orthodoxy is more generally conceived, right? Traditional orthodoxies.
Okay, so basically, one of the divisions here is he continues to assume the critique that modernity gave to the traditionalism, and assumes the critique that postmodernity cave, and so now he wants to have it as sort of a multi-perspectival posture. And I basically say, can't be done. Or if you do try it, you will be always divided, because you need a map to work from. There is always a map within you that you are working from. And whereas I am not of a mind to go all the way back to orthodoxy, if in fact that can be done, and again, I'm not critiquing or criticizing my Orthodox friends, I'm just saying that I think, in fact, there is a valid critique of modernity, and there is a valid critique of what of modernity's sort of attack on the Bible, and you can critique these things, and in fact, I will continue to do so. I really want to dig into that book, He Flew, because I think the fact that Carlos Eyre has written that book, and he is a well-respected Ivy League scholar of history, and the issues that he's bringing up is showing that modernity is in fact receding, and that means that while modernity has brought a bunch of valuable critiques to address a whole bunch of foolishness, and it given us a good amount of tools, that doesn't mean that I don't think there's any just going back and embracing a traditionalism, because I don't think you can do it because the world has changed. But I also don't think you should leave the modern critique unaddressed. And anyway, that's something that probably Brendan and we're going to have to agree to disagree on with respect to that. But I want to get so I played a little. Hopefully, I dropped in the local distance video, and I played this little clip, and it's a very good conversation. I was surprised Sam went so easy on him. Now, saying that, I know, because everybody's like, well, you went really easy on so-and-so, and fair enough. But Sam's got his own things to address. Let's go back to this thing.
And then when people are there saying, well, what do we put in its place?
Next?
They're like, see ya. I'm out. And they go off and do different things. And
because again, if we think about a sedimentary image, traditional cultures left a sedimentary layer. Modernity left a sedimentary layer. Postmodernity has left a sedimentary layer, and now we're continuing to critique all of these layers beneath. Let's say we're slicing it down, but it's not going to be. You're not going to be bound to modernity or postmodernity or traditionalism, because they of course had their layers, and we at this point only see the smallest resolution of previous layers. In fact, I would argue that there are so many unexplored assumptions in the maps we inherit that are inside of us, that sort of pop up and take us unaware. We inherit, this is part of the compression algorithm, that are narratives. We inherit so much information in the way that we do things, both individuals and as groups, the way that we do things. There's so much information packed in there that so often we don't really know all of the assumptions and everything that's in there, because you can't, because of course in life you make an analysis and you act, and that's the way life goes. So now I think again we're at a point where Elizabeth Oldfield and Justin Brierley are correct that things are changing and things are going back, and part of the realization is that we're looking down at the sedimentary layers, appreciating the fact that you might yell all you want about an Iron Age God and that old book and yada, 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 and Israel and slavery and all of those things. But Tom Holland's critique, and he's not been alone in making it, is that Rene Girard made the same thing. You're using Christianity. You've assumed all of these sedimentary layers into your mapping, and those are the things that you are using to attack the source itself. And again, Richard Dawkins is this walking contradiction in this. And I'm sure, it was fascinating, Alex O'Connor's conversation with Richard Dawkins with respect to this, because Alex O'Connor's just kind of looking at him like, and, Daniel Dennett passed away. I'm not sure what to say to an atheist that would be welcome. I wish comfort for his family and all of them. It's kind of the awkwardness that happens for atheists at funerals. It's like, well, he's gone. But Alex O'Connor, I think, is, he's a younger man, so he's continued to evolve. So he's seeing all of this and saying, yeah, how you inherit these holidays. What do you do with them?
What are people to do? And that's why...
Was it the job of the new atheists to provide something to...
Well, maybe not. Some people are just good at...
Well, they tried. And again, my one appearance on Unbelievable was with a guy, and we talked about these Sunday services, and I fell for the guy because he's like, business should be booming with all the nuns. Don't we want to get together on Sunday morning and sing Beatles songs and listen to a TED Talk and give money to poor families? And you don't need God and all this stuff in the mix. But it fails and fails and fails and fails. So what do you do?
Diagnosing problems. Karl Marx is a good example. Karl Marx's diagnoses of the way the world works are fascinating to read and incredibly useful, even if you disagree with them. But obviously attempts to sort of build societies on those ideas alone have failed. It seems like you need something a little bit more. I just don't think it's true, the religion stuff, I mean. And so that's what...
Okay, right there. I don't think it's true, the religion stuff. Oh, okay, what stuff? Now, C.W. Weeks, despite the fact that he shocked some of my Livingstone's listeners by dropping F-bombs on the Friday morning live stream, sent me a book that he's been very much wanting me to read, and I'm reading it, and he's got hopes that maybe I'll have the author on the channel because the author is an old man, and it's the author of another book that I've read a number of years ago, and Reformed thinker. But the part of the point of it is this whole myth of religious neutrality. The first line of the book is, how can we know for sure whether the God of Christianity is real? And again, part of the struggle that you have is, well, what on earth do you mean by that word real? Since many wrong ideas about religion abound, both among public and the scholarly world, we cannot avoid beginning with the issue of the definition of what counts as religious belief. And so now he brings it sort of all the way down to basically to source. The single most glaring failure of all the recent discussions in relation to religion, to science, philosophy, politics, anything else, is the lack of a clear definition of the meaning of religious belief. What is needed is in all these discussions is what is called in logic a real definition, a statement in the characteristics that are true of all religious beliefs, which, when taken together, are true of only religious beliefs. And basically what he's talking about is a definition that boils down to source. This common core of meaning I call the status of divinity, and the logically cleanest way to describe this status, I think, is to say they all regard the divine as the unconditional, non-dependent reality which generates all that is not non-dependent. I don't think that's a bad way to go. But when Alex O'Connor talks about religious stuff, I think it's much more relational and transactional. He's not really talking philosophy here because there's so many steps sort of in the philosophy. Most people, I think, when they talk about this religion stuff, really have another little narrative much more in mind that sort of goes like this. And of course Sam Harris brought this out to Jordan Peterson. I shut my eyes and I pray and I ask God to heal some person that I love who is sick. And there is an agent somewhere who hears and is, by virtue of my request, somehow forced either to act or to not act, and has the capacity to act or not act, and that action could then yield the healing of my friend, etc., etc. And that, in that little narrative, for many people is what they imagine all the religious stuff to be. And when you look at what Jordan Peterson has done, he has worked, while he's touched on this, that came up in the first Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein, Sam Harris conversation. Jordan has basically been making the point that psychologically and culturally, religion works in all sorts of other ways, such as value hierarchies and ideals. And all of these things are built into the sedimentary map. And they aren't just simply dislodged. And if you go all the way back to Jordan Peterson talking at Lafayette College, someone asked him for a definition of religion. It says, basically, it's the foundation for your actions. Because you work off this sedimentary map, and there's so much that's simply built in and assumed by this that you culturally inherit, that you act from it. And my friend who was at the estuary meeting, in that way, almost everyone downstream of Latin Christendom and other Christendoms is Christian. And Christianity, as an attractive system of values and ideals, has in fact permeated the value and ethical imaginations of every world religion. And in that way, sneaky Jesus has smuggled all sorts of his code into all sorts of things all over the world. And so when you just say the religion stuff, well, what do you mean? And I think he means that somehow I can have a personal relationship with God and call upon God to act on my behalf, perhaps bending the laws of nature. Now, at some point, again, when we get into they flew, we have to address Hume, because I think his argument that is sort of put out there, and everyone will put it out, extreme claims require extreme evidence. And it's like, it's such a bad argument. It's such a bad argument. On one hand, the argument makes sense, because if someone walks into my office and says, there is a rainbow unicorn prancing around Livingstone Sanctuary right now, and I'm afraid he will poop raisins onto the floor that you will have to clean up. Go out there, Pastor Paul, and handle the rainbow unicorn. I would at once imagine there's no such rainbow unicorn over there in the sanctuary in Livingstones. I don't think it's there. But now, the evidence would not be in any way extraordinary. Either walk into there and either I would see one or I wouldn't. Or, in fact, as we go to Don't Sleep, Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, when they see the God across the river, or they don't see the God across the river, I don't think there's such a thing as extraordinary evidence. I think there's just evidence, and the evidence is arranged relationally, socially, and physically. It's just evidence. And people are going to make up their mind with respect to evidence, and groups are going to have different standards of evidence. But right now, of course, there's a trial in New York City that I'm sure none of you have heard about. It involves a former president and a porn star. I mean, who could write this stuff? But here we are. So the religion stuff. And basically had a really good comment left by someone. He starts out the comment, Paul, you probably won't see this. No, I probably will. But I have a great answer as to why religion was replaced by secular coaching, therapists, etc. In my experience, most people that go into religion for their practical problems never get them actually solved, because in mainstream evangelicalism, which is most people's background, it is all about going to church and doing something for the church. Now, I would pause there and say, the answer to this is actually way more complicated. Because many of the fixes for what ails people actually came downstream from religion. Universities are downstream, hospitals are downstream, social welfare services are downstream. In many ways, what we have done in the wake of Christianity is built all sorts of mechanisms, social, secular mechanisms, to deal with problems that human beings commonly face. But this doesn't really get into religion, because the argument is basically that it was Jesus' concern for suffering. Now, I've been playing with this in my Sunday sermons lately, but Jesus' concern for suffering that actually creates a value and a value hierarchy and some ideals that have actually forced the the ongoing historic formation of many institutions that address the common needs of people. It could be that the NHS in the UK, and I always hear, we do listen to what you Brits say over there. I mean, the beloved NHS in the UK probably did more to sideline the Anglican Church, with possible exceptions of Oxford University or other universities or other things, than anything else. Because, wow, modern medical technology works pretty well. Not perfectly. Still chaplains in hospitals, but they can do a lot, and we're very impressed by that technology. Simply put, practical issues by the church have been deemed not spiritual. So now he's talking about sort of a dualism, a bifurcation, and I would argue probably not as much as you think. Meanwhile, people, if they are observant of religious people, notice this. They're turned off because regular churchgoers simply have a bunch of issues festering that they postpone with a religious blanket. I'm not sure that's the case either. I have not noticed that church people go to the doctor any less than unchurched people. In fact, I have seen people avoid the doctor for all sorts of reasons, and magical thinking or wishful thinking is simply a natural part of human thought modes. You're one of the very few pastors that I've heard take practical issues seriously. I find that many, many pastors deal with practical issues regularly. So I beg to differ on some of the points of the comment, but thank you for the comment.
Why I think we're seeing this, because people are beginning to realize that it probably isn't true. They can't quite get behind the truth claims, but they recognize that there's some utility in having other.
And again, I really don't think it's the truth claims. I know people want to point to the resurrection, or they want to point to miracles in the Bible, and they want to point to these things. I think when people are asked, they gin up ideas to give. But I think the decisions are made at quite a bit lower level, because there are plenty of people who go to church that have all sorts of questions about the dreaded truth claims. And I haven't seen that if you can sort of satisfy the truth claims, then people will all start going into church anymore. I think the main argument that he's dealing with is that, in fact, the sedimentary map that we have all, civilizational map that we have all inherited, that especially if you live in places like the United States and the UK and places like Western Europe, where the whole world seems to want to get to because of the mappings that we have enjoyed, the wealth, the prosperity, the freedom, the culture, the politics, all of these civilizational treasures that have come up with Christianity. The world says, yeah, it's a better place, it's a better way to live. I want to get there. I want to make a living. I want to have rule of law. I want to have all of these things. And I don't really think the truth claims and this stuff sort of on top in terms of religion really says a lot about it.
So I was watching a few of your interviews in preparation for this, and I heard you speak about religion quite a bit. And if you look up what religion means in the Webster Dictionary, you get something like a system of faith centered on a supernatural being or beings or something like that. But I've heard you use religion to describe things like punk rockers, for example, that's a religious experience. So my first question would be, how do you define what is considered religious? And then sort of as a follow-up to that, if, say, Sam Harris...
Religious is what you act out.
What's that?
Religious is what you act out.
Anything you act out.
Everything you act out is predicated on your implicit axioms. And the system of implicit axioms that you hold as primary is your religious belief system. It doesn't matter whether you're an atheist or not. That's just surface noise.
And again, you can see the turning of the page, because a number of years ago, this was considered, wow, I heard it and I thought, I was in middle school. And my religion teacher was saying, all of life is religious. Everything you do, it's a religious choice, because He basically, in middle school, in my little Christian school in the Christian Reformed Church, delivered me the same definition of religion that Jordan Peterson is doing, and he's got his hand on his face. It's like, this really shouldn't be controversial. Isn't this sort of what we've always known? No, but we suddenly had all of this hoopla about supernatural this or that. And partly the church's fault, because in the 1970s and 80s, as church attendance was starting to decline, the main motivation of churches in the West was to try to activate dormant Christians. And so what churches did was basically beat the bushes and say, civilizational Christianity is not enough. And now, of course, civilizational Christianity has been in decline. So people are like, oh, dread Christian nationalism. We don't want civilizational Christianity. But we do want hospitals and schools and rule of law and all of these things that are in the sedimentary map that Christianity has delivered to us. But no Christianity, thank you very much. Oh, it's kind of like, I'd really like my body without water. I don't want there to be any water in my body. If I would go to my doctor and make this suggestion, doctor, I'm feeling great, but it's come to my attention that there's water in my body. I'd like you to take that out. And the doctor would look at me and say, no. If I took out all the water from you, like in some Dune Fremen, when someone dies, they suck all the water out of them. Doesn't work.
So it has nothing to do with divinity or
No, I didn't say
supernatural
that.
beings?
No.
Or it doesn't necessarily have to do with those?
No, it probably necessarily has to do with it too, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your voluntarily articulated statements about whether or not you believe in something like a transcendent deity. So, I mean, what you act out is much more what you are than what you say about yourself. And what the hell do you know about what you believe anyways? You're complicated, man.
It's a fair question.
Well, seriously, people are complicated. Like we're not transparent to ourselves at all. That's why we have to go to university and study psychology. It's like, we're not exactly black boxes, but we are the most complicated things there are, right? And we can't even program our VCR clocks. So it's like, how the hell can we propose to understand ourselves? And I'm existentially oriented, which is to say that I think that what you hold to be true is best determined as a consequence of an analysis of your actions rather than as a consequence of an analysis of what you purport to believe. Now, in order to act, you can't act without a hierarchy of value, which I tortured the other poor questioner about. You can't act without a hierarchy of values, because you can't act unless you think one thing is better than another. Because why would you act otherwise? So that means that you're embedded within a hierarchy of values, whether you know it or not, or maybe multiple fragmentary and competing hierarchies of value, which is all the worse for you, by the way, because it just makes you very confused. That hierarchy of values has an axiomatic, it's based on axioms. And the probability that you understand them is very low, because generally people don't understand their axioms. But that axiomatic system is essentially your religious system. And there's no way out of that as far as I can tell. And you can say, well, it isn't predicated on conscious belief in a transcendent deity. It's like, okay, have it your way. But, most people in this room act out a Judeo-Christian ethic. And not only do they act it out, if they're treated in a manner that's not commensurate with that ethic, they get very, very, very annoyed. So, for example, if I fail to treat you as if you're an embodiment of a divine fragment, let's say, that's characterized by the ability to make free choice and to determine your own destiny in some sense, or if I fail to treat you as if you're a valued contributing member of the polity as a sovereign individual, then you'll find that very offensive and become angry. It's like, okay, then that's what you believe. Well, if I ask you if you believe any of that, well, that's a whole different story. You might give me some radical leftist nonsense. But that doesn't take away from what you've... that doesn't take away from the fundamentals of your action.
As one final thing. So when you and, say, Sam Harris argue about religion...
People believe that it is true. And I don't know where that leaves us, because in this discussion about whether religion is good or bad for society, I said yesterday, look, I will accept your premise wholesale that religion is good, maybe even necessary for society. What do you want me to...
I mean, that's a remarkable change over the last 5 years, 6 years, right? Because 6 years ago, we were listening still to the new atheists sort of go on about how we got to get rid of all this. And now, of course, Richard Dawkins, well, we don't want people believing this stuff, but then, of course, well, I don't know who's going to maintain all those beautiful old churches in England. Are you going to have the government do it?
To do if I just don't think it's true? Might just lie to my children, raise them believing something that I don't believe is the...
Do you tell them about Father Christmas? I mean, you lie to your children all the time. Now, I'm playing with the word lie, because what you do is you take enormously complex things and you tell them to your children. The garbage truck goes by and makes a big noise, and your little 3-year-old looks at you because it's the first time they ever heard that big noise, and they look at you like their life is going to end, and you say, it'll be okay. Will it really? Will it really be okay? Now, it might be okay with respect to the garbage truck, but will everything really be okay? That kid could get leukemia, you know. You and your wife could have a fight and get a divorce, you know. That's gonna do a number on your kid. Yeah, life in this world is not really okay. And then sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. I mean, the difficulty is, of course, actually trying to get our minds around anything. We act out in ways that are both smarter and dumber than all of our little verbal systems that we put together.
The case, because I think it will somehow be beneficial to society. I don't think it works like that. I don't think people can actually fool themselves. Sure, you can act as if God exists, and that's what someone like Peterson says that people do.
See, again, I think people do it all the time. You send your kid to this school. Well, it's usually the best, whatever school you're sending them to, it's more than likely you think the best of the options you have available to it. Is it a perfect school? No. Is it going to mess them up? Possibly. Are they going to be abused in one way or another? Could be. But you send them to the school anyway, and you say, have a great day. It'll all be okay. How do you know? You don't know it'll all be okay. You going to wrap your kid in bubble wrap and you keep him at home all the time? I mean, this is the way life works. So, okay, so don't want to tell them about God or death. And then, I watch parents do all kinds of crazy things, like, the guinea pig dies and they have to quick go out and either make up a story about guinea pig went to the farm, or guinea pig, then you find another guinea pig that looks almost just like it and you swap it in because, well, I don't want my kid to know about death. Okay, well, what wouldn't you like them to know about death? And at some point, death is going to find them, and they're going to have pretty much instinctive questions with respect to death. And again, I'm really getting anxious. Maybe this week I'll start making a video on They Flew, because all sorts of issues open up. Because we're not even sure what a person is. I mean, your dead grandmother is alive in you in a certain way. Well, what do you mean alive? Well, fair enough. But the sedimentary layers of your dead grandmother are encoded into the decisions about how you act, and to a degree, quite possibly also your genetics. And so it's sort of, it's nature and nurture have come together to have some of your grandmother in you. So when I look at the whole, I don't know if I want to use that, the postmodern, when I look at the trying to figure out what we're talking about today, dead people are still with us in many respects. Karl Marx is clearly with us. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is clearly with us. Donald Trump's going to be with us long after. that poor big body doesn't carry him around anymore. It's really actually hard to know what a person is and what a body is. And now we have an idea about a physical body, but you don't have to spend too much time with people. And this is where, again, being a pastor is an advantage. You don't have to spend too much time with people to begin to realize that dead people are very powerful. They're playing around in people's lives and hearts all the time, in their psyche all the time. And in fact, the issues in somebody's home or in someone's parenting or in someone's marriage, the person's name might be forgotten. They might be 4 or 5 generations back in that sedimentary level. You don't even know who they are, but they are screwing you up and your marriage, and you don't even know why. And you're going to spend thousands of dollars on a shrink, sit there and blab at them. And yeah, it's a psychologist that says, you're not transparent to yourself. I spend hours sitting you in an office and can't figure out, well, why do I feel bad every time my wife does this, or my husband does this, or my kid does this, or my doctor does this, or my boss does this? Why do I feel so bad? Don't know. Let's see if we can figure something out and have you feel less bad. But hopefully that feeling less bad won't cause other problems that 3 generations from now, somebody's going to sit in some office or look at some little floating string of lights to try to undo. This is what we are. And so, yeah, I don't want to tell my kids about invisible things beyond Santa Claus and Father Christmas. Okay, what exactly are you going to tell them? Grandma might be dead, but she's not really gone.
Do already, but ultimately, if you just say, well, I think that, it should just act like a Christian because it's good for me, then when push comes to shove and you really have to make a moral sacrifice, if you're not actually a Christian, you're probably not going to do the actually Christian thing.
Right there. Excellent point. But part of the problem is that we act like, so we listen, as Jordan, we listen to the chattering rider on the elephant, and we believe the rider. I'm a Christian. What does that mean? I love my neighbor as myself. Do you really? How well do you love your neighbor? Because what we're not really talking about is, we imagine that belief is this thing out here, and then, well, that's a powerful thing because we can kind of hold ourselves accountable to it or not. But the real thing is formation. The real thing is not only the sedimentary layers in the first draft map you received, but by having lived decades, the sedimentary layers of the behaviors in you that have been formed by your matrix of community and people and values and all of those things that are innumerable, that we can't even completely account for, that decides whether or not you sacrifice for your community. I've seen atheists be so unbelievably generous, and you ask them, why did you give and serve so sacrificially? That was the way I was raised. And they'll often admit, yeah, they were believers, they were raised that way, and I don't believe that stuff anymore, but I still act that way. And I think that's good. I feel for the future because, well, the next generation will say, yeah, I remember Dad acted that way. But it didn't have the rhythm of every week, the stories being put into us, all of that background being put together and formed. It didn't have that. So then when the sacrifice came, and you see this in history, and the truth is, not everybody who's been formed in it will sacrifice. Look at the persecutions in the Roman Empire. Some people crumpled and some people didn't. Look at Langton, that book that I read about the Japanese internment camp in China, about, that had Eric Liddell, the star runner and the saint in there, where he sacrificially gave. He was a missionary in China, Protestant. He sacrificially gave, and the monks there, they were in solitary consignment. And they're like, you ever watch Stir Crazy, that old Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor movie? They put the monk in solitary confinement, and the camp bursts out laughing because it's like, He's used to torturing himself, and now you just, you put him in this room, and he's going to do what he would have done if you hadn't hauled him in here and starved him. You read these stories of these medieval monks, and they starve themselves, and they whip themselves, and they isolate themselves, and then someone comes along and says, I'm going to put you in a box, I'm going to whip you and starve you. Oh, situation normal. It's all about formation, and part of the shallowness of the anthropological model that are behind so many of these conversations is, well, I love my neighbors as myself. Yeah, but you're not going to perform unless you've built it in terms of the training. You can look up I just had him on the tip of my tongue. You can look up Dallas Willard and where's the darn book? Training versus Trying. And in fact, all of that religious stuff, which is quite mundane, often quite dull, quite unmiraculous, is not very different from school. In fact, of course, school is in some ways what has come. Teaching little children in school is part of what has come from the church sort of deployed. And I'm saying that's not the only, church isn't the only one that gets credit for it, but ICPU detected. What is going on? Oh, there it is. Go away.
Well, I wonder whether this is afforded to people because of the convenience and comfort of modern life. The fact that having to really, really put something on the line, it's mostly LARPing as, belief systems and, I'll pick up that piece of trash and I will, give money to this person on the street.
Yes. Yeah, people have sort of forgotten. I mean,
it's like bourgeois religious belief.
It's so irregularly that we have to make genuine moral sacrifices of the kind that used to be commonplace throughout the history of humanity that we've sort of...
And in some ways, those moral sacrifices, they were made because it was short term. You had to sacrifice in order that you preserve that seed corn, so you had something to plant with next season. And again, all of that formation built it into you. And so you were used to denying yourself, and now we're used to never denying ourselves.
Sort of forgotten our ability to do so, and I think that if you push people now, they recognize that they probably wouldn't make those sacrifices. Did you see the Mr. Beast poll where he asked, would you rather have like $1 million or like a random person on Earth dies or something like that if you press this button?
No.
And like, I think it might have been a majority of people, that slim majority, said they'd press that button. Yeah, kill someone random. I'll take $1 million. And I actually kind of believe them. I think they actually would.
I believe it too. But you have the inverse, the Stalin inverse, where 1 million people die. It's the statistics. One person died. Just watch Wag the Dog. Send the TV camera to the one person who's going to die for $1 million for this person over here, and then make it be a person that in some ways a vast majority of people connect with or identify with or feel sorry for, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or if you put the person dying in San Quentin and you have the person over in some small little town in India starving, everybody will say, smash the button. I mean, this shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us. We know people.
And people want to say that that's because we've lost, our belief in God. I don't know. Maybe I think a better explanation is just that, like you say, we've become too...
Again, it's a formational issue. It's not, belief in God.
Comfortable. And so when somebody says, in other words, like, this must be due to decline in religion and the fact that we've forgotten our Judeo-Christian heritage. I mean, you'll probably hear that a lot from people that you might talk to on this podcast. They'll say something like that. Just think to yourself, like, is that really the best explanation? Is that the only explanation? Could it be something to do with the growth of technology? Could it be to do with something to do with the growth of comfort?
Yeah.
And is it more likely to do with that? And maybe it's not the lack of religion that's causing the other stuff, but this other.
Or maybe it's not an either-or situation. Maybe, in fact, the formation has everything to do with some of what's talked about. Again, and you see this all the time. So somebody posted on Twitter a whole group at an Ivy League university dressed up as if they were, I don't know, they've got that They've got the clothing that they, in one way or another, truly or falsely identify with Palestinians, and they're chanting and doing all of these things. It's like, wait a minute, wasn't Yale? Didn't these students sort of excoriate a professor over Halloween costumes? And now this? So this is human beings. This is what we're like. And it's the formation of not only the cultural sedimentary layer, and in fact, all of the arguments, systemic this, systemic that, it's all supposed to be, broad-based, but we forget it. We so selectively listen to it. It's our personal sedimentary layer. And, well, we get that when we're trying to, let's say, max, when we're maxing ourselves, when we're making ourselves maximally physically attractive to attract someone from the opposite sex, or we're trying to make ourselves maximally education. We understand formation then, but when it comes to moral formation, ethical formation, well, my beliefs are right out here, and here are my standards, and you're going to fail your standards, I can promise you that.
The source that's causing both of those things.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot recently about stuff that is literally true but figuratively false. And figuratively true but literally false. And it kind of seems a little bit like the beliefs that you're talking about here. It may be comforting, increasing in happiness, adaptive to kind of act as if these things exist. The belief in free will, actually, believing in free will, determinism generally is something that may be literally true but figuratively false.
Yes.
And that's...
Okay, first of all, stop using that word, that L word, literally. You mean physically true? Because the truth is you don't really have the right way to use it. Because the problem with determinism might be true. Why? You should read C.S. Lewis's Miracles. The whole show, that everything's just one grand interlocking machine of cause and effect. You can't hope to prove that. You can't hope to prove it, and you can't hope to disprove it. It's a kind of calculation that basically you have this image in your head about how things work, and you see cause and effect, and you think, maybe everything is cause and effect. And you just project it maximally. You don't know anything about maximally. We don't even know how people live in another part of the world. Never mind, everything in the world is a product of one grand interlocking thing of mechanism. But it's an idea that floated around, so the chattering rider on top of the elephant says, boo.
Kind of where I've come to as an opinion with this, that largely it's through designed ignorance, that I just don't think about it that much.
Precisely the reason it evolves. That's why it exists as an illusion, because it does something for us. And that's fine. I've never had a problem saying that. But when the sort of auspices under which I'm having a conversation with Ben Shapiro is that he made a video called The Atheist Delusion. And in that video he says, like, look, you can't have free will without God. I say, yeah, I agree. You can't have free will without God. You just also can't have it with God. And he essentially says, like, well, there's sort of I don't know how free will works, but it's sort of a mystery that I'm willing to accept wholesale. And I'm like, well, this is fine, but who's the delusory one here? You know what I mean? Like, I've got no problem with you saying, like, well, I see that, this isn't what Ben said, by the way, but I have no problem with somebody saying, well, yeah, I mean, maybe free will doesn't exist, but it's better to act as though it does. It's like, okay, fine, but then don't say that I'm the one acting under a delusion. I mean, delusions can be good. They might evolve for a good reason, but I don't know. I guess I find it difficult to treat something as true that isn't. It's a bit like the gun is always loaded. That's one of Brett Weinstein's examples. It's not true.
Now, this gun is loaded illustration is the perfect illustration of formation, because you're saying the gun is always loaded as this little fiction. What you're saying is treat the gun as if it's always loaded. What you're saying is form your behavior with this gun. Add sedimentary layers in your behavior in this one narrow area, so you never point that gun at a person. You always point the barrel down. You always assume, you always check, you always do this. That's a formational thing, not this sort of imaginative thing that I say I believe there's a unicorn pooping raisins in the sanctuary right now. Religion is believing things without evidence. I will name it and claim it. This will be a faith word action that there's a rainbow unicorn in the sanctuary pooping raisins. It's formed. It's formed, and it's formed civilizationally, and it's formed personally. I'm running out of time.
True that the gun is always loaded, but we're just going to pretend that it is. And that's much better, at least to a good society. If we always
literally
act like
false,
the gun's
but
loaded.
figuratively true.
But, like, you can't actually act like...
The gun, there's nothing written about the gun. It's not literal, as it is written. No. It's physically. There's a bullet in the chamber, in the physical world. Physical. Not literal.
Like it's true. Like if you ask me to put money on, like opening the gun and seeing if there's a bullet in
You
there.
can behave in a way that functions as if it were.
Yeah, but then when push comes to shove and you really need to make a decision, you're not going to be able to do it unless you really believe it's true.
So this whole...
No. Not unless you believe it's true. You're really, when push comes to shove, you're really not going to do it unless you've been formed. Which is why police, military, gun clubs, they practice. So one of my sons hasn't gotten his big job yet out of university, so he's back working for the city doing lifeguard training. You can sit there and you can tell the lifeguards what to do, but you have to get in the water. You know, the other 3 Ps. You have to get in the water. You got to get that muscle memory. That's what we're really talking about here. And we're saying, yeah, but giving, that's not muscle memory. No, but it sort of is. That's a better analogy for it. It's not yes or no out here sort of in the abstract thinky-talky world. It's in the practical world. It's in your formation. It's in your sedimentary layers. That's the sedimentary map. That's where it is.
Only works in low stakes situations.
Exactly. Yeah. So you know, it's all too easy to say, oh, you know, we'll just sort of act as though it's true.
Good example here, using the acting as if the gun is loaded thing. You do not point it at anybody. You do not leave it around the children. You do not do the rest of it. If a robber breaks into your house, you don't go downstairs with said gun acting as if...
And most people, even if they have a gun, imagining that it's going to be handy in that scenario in the middle of the night when you hear something downstairs and you think, oh, I got to get my gun. Those kind of people, whether or not, you know, loaded, not loaded, they're not thinking it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And that's why police department, military, they train, because it's formational. And it's also why, well, is that gun really a great idea? Because you're stumbling downstairs in the middle of the night and you see something move and you bang, and you just shot your dog. Hope it's just the dog. So it's a good video, but again, and I'm hopeful because look at everything that's changed over the last few years. We're making progress. It's the formation. It's building up those sedimentary maps. They got something for the title, Sedimentary Maps. Got to figure out how to do the rest of the title. So let me know what you think. Leave a comment.
The catchphrase I say go to church. And what I mean by that is, in some ways, you have to engage in the human relationships around you. That's like the best way to go about that. You know, you have relationship, you have a family, you have some kind of community around you. And so that's the best place to go, because in some ways that's the place that will have this procedural aspect to it that will ground the other stuff. You know, it's like if you have to, you know, to help your kids with their homework, or you have to do this kind of really grounded stuff that has that's very little to do with the ideology. You get engaged in other people's lives, then it binds you in a different way, right? It binds you.
And then like my father would, he was going to church, and I wasn't really living with him, but he was going to church, and he would like kind of, those are elements of this conversation. Is I got to go to church.
it's being part of a church is part of Christian discipleship. And in that word discipleship, there's this word discipline, which is, it's a discipline to go to church.
What would be so great about actually going to a church is like you start going to a church so that when you do need like to be prayed for, when you have something to be prayed for about, you have a place to just say that.
You're dead on right, Grizz, and that is what the church is for. To know and be known, to love and be loved, to have a place to go where people can pray for you, where they will welcome you in. And this is, again, part of why I want churches to have estuaries, because it is, I know that it is difficult in many churches for people to, in a sense, come in and bring their real self. And what I mean by that is have to say what's on their mind, or you can't wrestle with them. It's like, so Plato, as John reminds us, is broad, so he's a wrestler. You can't wrestle over a screen. So maybe if it's paintball for Jesus, maybe it should be wrestling with Plato. Because, and in church, in a real space, now often it doesn't happen, I understand that, but at least there's a chance to actually have a relationship with grit. And that's part of why churches are local, they're relational, they're face-to-face, they're in real life.
Said about why would young people want to go to church, and I feel like I want to have some kind of dynamic message or something that if they do find some reason to come, I'm trying to fish, so I'm throwing bait and I'm trying to hook somebody. It's what Paul is doing too. He said about being evangelical. It's evangelism of some sort.
Well, fishers of men is the promise, yes?
Yes, correct.
It's possessed. We did go to church today. I took communion.
I don't go to church to think or to rationalize God. I go to church to worship Him. Right? And that's, I'm happy with that. I'm very happy with that. And afterwards, during coffee hour, we can all argue about the God of our understanding, right? Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think that the wild twin, the thing that led to my sort of dawning to consciousness of Christianity was a 101-day vigil that I did in forest. And I went into the forest.
You don't have to go crazy.
Yeah.
You actually have to go, you have to humble yourself and and do it right here, right now, right?
Get up. I like how Father Schmemann talks about it for the life of the world. He says it starts when you get up and get ready and you walk or you go to church. So you start those are simple. I get up. I brush my teeth, I take a shower, I put on clothes, I go, the things of life, and we're ascending up into heaven. You're